The Cold War unleashed some of the strangest and most terrifying experiments known to science. These days, everyone knows about MKUltra and many of the nefarious things the CIA got up to. But what about their enemies? The Soviet Union and its fearsome KGB were running their own monstrous experiments to get an edge in the ideological war for the future of humanity. From poisons that created the perfect heart attacks and smallpox bombs to telekinesis and reanimating the dead. Today, on A Day in History, we're delving into the most bizarre and chilling Soviet experiments that you have never heard about. The Cold War was full of espionage and assassination. The Soviets needed weapons to compete with their American enemies, and they turned to one of the simplest weapons of all: poison. From its inception, the Soviet Union invested heavily in secret poison experiments to create the perfect, undetectable weapons to eliminate their enemies. The heavy classification of all material relating to the program means that we don't know exactly when the first Soviet poison laboratory was founded. It was either set up on Lenin's orders in 1921 or by Stalin in 1926. Either way, its goal was the same: analyze and create poisons to be used against the government's enemies. It worked on developing new poisons through the 1920s and 30s, but its most infamous work began in 1939, under the supervision of Grigory Mairanovsky. Mairanovsky had earned his PhD for human experiments with mustard gas, so it's no surprise that his leadership of the secret poison program in what became known simply as Laboratory 1 would follow this trend. Mairanovsky's goal was simple: create the perfect, undetectable poison so the Soviets could eliminate anyone, anywhere, without being detected. Mairanovsky was given huge amounts of money, material, and human test subjects to make that happen. Mairanovsky was given political prisoners who became guinea pigs for tests with almost any poison imaginable, including cyanide, strychnine, and ricin. They called their test subjects birdies, and it's unknown how many of these birdies were killed. One study identified the names of 150 victims personally killed by Mairanovsky, but there were certainly many others whose names have been lost. From detailed study of the effects of these known poisons, Mairanovsky developed new concoctions. Their biggest success was known as K2, a tasteless, odorless, and nearly undetectable poison that, when applied to a human, caused a near total collapse in muscle function. Subjects would be unable to move, then to breathe. It could kill a healthy man in 15 minutes, in what would appear under an autopsy to be a simple heart attack. Mairanovsky's team proved to be lethally effective, so much so that the government began using them as executioners. They often sent political prisoners to him to be eliminated, which Mairanovsky used as an opportunity to have yet another test subject. For example, in 1947, the accused traitor Isaiah Oggins, who had spent the previous 7 years as a Gulag prisoner, was marked for execution and sent to Mairanovsky to do the deed. Mairanovsky injected him with poison to observe his painful death over the following few minutes. By the 1940s, Laboratory 1 was probably the most advanced poison facility in the world. Even Nazi experiments conducted during the Holocaust paled in comparison. Upon reviewing evidence of Nazi poison experiments on concentration camp victims, Mairanovsky proudly concluded that Nazi poison achievements were, quote, significantly less than ours. Mairanovsky fell from power in 1951, after being caught in a wave of purge, eventually dying in 1964. However, the poison program continued on, formulating new horrors until the last days of the Soviet Union, and perhaps beyond it. Psychoenergetics was the field of unusual psychic abilities, including remote viewing and psychokinesis. The USSR secretly conducted experiments to uncover whether such powers really existed, and their conclusions were disturbing. After years of research, Soviet scientists concluded that there was some sort of truth to the powers, even though they didn't fully understand them. They were so certain of this that in 1975, they established an official commission to review the research, which doubled down on the field and insisted it was valuable. The main Soviet interest was in remote viewing. This was the phenomenon where people claimed to have had out-of-body experiences and were able to see the world from outside their body. If this was real, it would have too many useful intelligence uses to ignore. Unlike American experiments with remote viewing that used conscious, fully aware subjects, Soviet research preferred altered consciousness states. Subjects were drugged, hypnotized, or even made to do yoga in hopes of putting them in a different mental state to enable remote viewing. The goal was not only to prove the power existed, but to devise a way to make anyone able to do it with training. While Soviet experiments claimed some success, clear evidence of remote viewing was never made public. The other major area of focus was psychokinesis, moving objects with the mind. Experiments tested everything from moving cups to freezing animals with the mind with individuals who claimed to have psychokinetic abilities. Once again, the classified nature of the experiments means that most of their work is unknown. It was, however, productive enough that such experiments were continually funded and staffed for years. One supposed success story did emerge, though. In 1963, Soviet authorities identified Nina Kulagina, who claimed to have psychokinetic powers inherited from her mother. Scientists brought her in for tests, where they claimed Nina was able to move objects seemingly with her mind. For several years, Nina was brought in repeatedly to demonstrate psychokinesis, and in 80% of tests, she apparently did so. Nina was observed to move numerous small objects, including matchsticks, compass needles, and small balls. During these tests, scientists observed intense concentration, with an unusually high heart rate and body temperature, showing she was exerting real physical effort. The experiments were exhausting for her, requiring several days' rest and supposedly leaving her dizzy and suffering intense pain in her head and spine. Several scientific papers were published on Nina's work, with the research team swearing that the results were genuine. They also recorded a short documentary film demonstrating Nina's powers that is still easily found today. However, these claims were met with heavy skepticism from those outside the team. Nina and the scientists were accused of fraud, of using magnets or hidden strings to give the illusion of psychokinesis. Nina had in fact been held criminally liable for fraud in the past, and despite the scientists' claims of success, they were never able to offer concrete proof or replicate their results with other subjects. Nevertheless, Nina Kulagina's case remains perhaps the most persuasive example of psychokinetic abilities known to science. But if remote viewing and psychokinesis aren't enough, Soviet scientists even tried to resurrect the dead. In 1925, Sergei Bryukhonenko unveiled a device he called the autojector. This system of electric pumps could circulate and oxygenate blood to act as a sort of artificial heart. In September 1925, he stunned the Second Congress of Russian Pathologists in Moscow by severing a dog's head and quickly attaching it to his device. The dog continued to blink, move, and respond to stimuli for almost 2 hours. Bryukhonenko replicated his experiments multiple times. By 1926, he was apparently able to keep the severed heads alive for 24 hours. The Soviet Chemical Pharmaceutical Institutes took a keen interest in his work, providing him funding, a lab, and publishing special issues of its journal dedicated to his research. Bryukhonenko's work triggered an outpouring of public and academic interest. The potential for his autojector to keep patients alive so that their hearts could be replaced or their heads transferred to new bodies opened a wave of speculation about a medical revolution. By 1928, his experiments were making waves in the Western press too. He continued to refine the work through the 1930s. In 1939, his progress was filmed for a documentary, Experiments in the Revival of Organisms, which reported to show that Bryukhonenko was now able to keep the heads alive for days at a time. Following this, Bryukhonenko received permission to expand his research to humans. Details of these human experiments are much less clear though. We do know that Bryukhonenko saw much less success working on human cadavers. He did not have permission to kill humans like he had dogs, so he had to rely on recently deceased human cadavers. Brain death due to lack of oxygen made his methods of resurrection ineffective on bodies which had been dead for more than a few minutes. Ultimately, he failed to achieve any sort of human resurrection or the animation of a severed human head. However, Bryukhonenko's work was pioneering for cardiac surgery in general. While the autojector never did see clinical use, the basic idea inspired later Soviet cardiologists, who went on to vastly improve heart surgery. As disturbing and frightening as the footage of animated severed dog heads was, Bryukhonenko's work may have been some of the most positive and life-saving that Soviet scientists ever conducted. It wasn't just poison that the Soviets tried to harness, but disease too. In 1959, a traveler from India arrived in Moscow, where they quickly fell ill and died of what was later found to be smallpox. A further 46 people were infected in the minor outbreak. When the Soviet authorities discovered it, they dispatched members of their biowarfare teams to collect blood and tissue samples from the victims, to be used in their weapons program. For the next 8 years, Soviet scientists worked on weaponizing smallpox. By 1967, it was ready. The smallpox variant India 1967 could be deployed using specialized bombs which the Soviets tested at their top-secret biological warfare site on Vozrozhdeniya Island. Codenamed Aralsk 7, the island test site was the USSR's primary open-air testing ground for biological weapons, and one of the most top-secret areas of the country. Over the decades, the Soviets tested everything from nerve gas to weaponized bubonic plague on the island, but it was those smallpox bombs that would cause the most trouble. In summer 1971, authorities had been testing the smallpox bombs around the island. The tests made little effort to control damage to the local environment or employees working on or around it. On August 6th, one crew member of a research vessel assessing the impact of biological weapons on the surrounding sea life fell violently ill. Since the weapons program was highly classified, no one knew it was smallpox, as the patient was returned to the mainland and admitted to hospital. The initial victim made a full recovery, but within days, multiple other people, including children as young as 9, began showing signs of infection too. 10 people were infected, and 3 died before local health officials realized it was smallpox. They were baffled at how the disease had arrived, since smallpox had been wiped out in the USSR since the 1930s. Biological weapons researchers like Pyotr Burgasov knew what had happened immediately. Still, it was top secret. When Burgasov contacted Yuri Andropov, head of the KGB, to warn him about the outbreak, he was ordered to never speak about it again. Fortunately, a swift response by local health officials and the fact that most citizens already had the smallpox vaccine prevented a major outbreak. Soviet authorities immediately covered it up, and it was only with the defection of bioweaponry scientists years later that the outbreak was rediscovered. But the smallpox leak wasn't the worst leak from the Soviet biowarfare program. In 1979, Soviet scientists at a biowarfare facility in the city of Sverdlovsk were working with Bacillus anthracis, better known as anthrax. The powdered substance was being weaponized by the Soviets at the time, and large amounts of powder was stored at the facility. Sometime on April 2nd, maintenance crews failed to replace filters in the facility's ventilation, causing an overload in the system that resulted in a large amount of anthrax being sucked into the ventilation and dispersed into the air outside. Anthrax was already spreading through the air by the time Soviet officials realized what had happened. In a chilling foreshadowing of the Chernobyl disaster 7 years later, Soviet officials downplayed the disaster among themselves and kept it a total secret in the crucial first hours and days after the release. Authorities apparently hoped that the anthrax would disperse harmlessly. On April 4th, the first victims in the city and surrounding villages showed up at hospitals presenting signs of anthrax poisoning. Bleeding sores, difficulty breathing, vomiting blood, and other horrible physical effects. Sources disagree on how many people were infected. Officially, 95 people were infected, with 68 of them dying. Other sources claim the numbers were higher, with some counting over 100 deaths. Due to the wind and the height of the chimney dispersing the anthrax, no one in the biowarfare program itself was infected. Every single known victim was a civilian. Naturally, Soviet authorities rushed to cover it up. They administered anthrax vaccines to nearby residents, refusing to explain why exactly they were doing so or what happened. Instead, they claimed that there'd been a naturally occurring anthrax outbreak thanks to rotten meat. It took foreign observers and whistleblowers to expose the disaster years after it happened. Only in 1992 did Russian President Boris Yeltsin officially revealed that biowarfare experiments had caused the outbreak. But just as the Soviets were hiding their own responsibility for biowarfare disasters, they were inventing responsibility for them for their enemies. The secrecy with which the Soviets conducted its twisted experiments showed that they knew how monstrous they were. Any normal person would be horrified and might turn against a government who performed them. The KGB realized this would work for the United States as well. Starting in 1983, the KGB launched an active measures campaign that accused the United States of secret experiments that created the new and terrifying AIDS virus. AIDS had first emerged in 1981 and had caused a global panic. At the time, its origins were unknown, and its emergence in the US gave the KGB the chance to pin blame on Washington. The KGB planted the claim in India first. Hoping to turn the Indian people away from the Americans, Soviet-linked newspapers published the claim that US experiments had created AIDS, and that they were about to move those experiments to secret labs in Pakistan. The rumor gained little traction at first, but a renewed propaganda effort in 1985 reignited the story, and it spread quickly around the globe. Newspapers in communist countries published the claims, and sympathetic journalists and academics in the West amplified them without evidence. The East German Stasi recruited a retired biophysicist named Jacob Siegel to publish pamphlets alleging that US intelligence had created AIDS in a lab and used the country's gay population as guinea pigs for their new biological weapon. The Soviets then ensured Siegel's claims were circulated, especially in Africa, which was especially hard hit by the AIDS epidemic, hoping to trigger a backlash against America and move the continent into the Soviet orbit. The KGB and Stasi knew that the claims were false, as did the scientific community in both the Western and communist world. Even the president of the USSR's Academy of Medical Science dismissed the idea as nonsense. The rebuttal from the global scientific community and the USSR's own scientists eventually forced the campaign to be halted by 1988. But the damage was done. The KGB had successfully spread the rumor around the world. Even today, a sizable number of people believe that AIDS was man-made, including as many as 15% of Americans. The belief remains popular in Africa, where that assumption has worked its way into government policy and scientific research on the continent, undermining efforts to fight the disease and save lives. The KGB's goal had been to deceive and trick people, but as far as messing with people's minds went, this was hardly the worst example. Russia does not have a law requiring the declassification of state secrets. It has kept the KGB archives mostly closed since the fall of the USSR and shows no signs of opening them. Everything covered in this video represents only some of the horrific revelations from a tiny portion of the archives. It is unknown how many more and worse horrors remain locked away in Soviet files. But more disturbing than past secrets are present ones. One of the reasons why so little has been declassified is that those programs have continued to the present day. The Soviet poison program was resumed by the Russian Federation in the 1990s and remains active to this day. Political dissidents like Alexei Navalny, defectors like Alexander Litvinenko, and even foreign politicians like Ukrainian Prime Minister Viktor Yushchenko have been attacked by Russia using poisons developed and distributed by the same program set up all those years ago. The name and flag changed, but the methods and goals have not.